Welcome to Authors at Drucker. I'm Dave Specht, Director of the Global Family Business Institute here at the Drucker School of Management. At the Drucker School, we aspire to become the global meeting place for the world's most influential business-owning families. Today's conversation represents progress in our achievement of that objective. Authors at Drucker is an interview series where we feature top authors that write about issues impacting business-owning families. Authors at Drucker is made possible from the generous sponsorship of the James E. Hughes Foundation. The foundation is dedicated to advancing the study of family governance and generational well-being. We at the Drucker School feel very aligned and very grateful to Jay Hughes and his foundation for their generous sponsorship. Last month, we heard from Kristen Keffler, author of The Myth of the Silver Spoon, a book about navigating family wealth and creating an impactful life. If you missed it, please visit our website so that you can listen to the recording. And before I begin, I want to share just a couple of other housekeeping items. I'm going to just share my screen here, and I will introduce Trudy in just a second. Next month, we will have Jamie Weiner, who's joining us today. And then the following month, we'll have Russ Allen Prince and Bob Doherty. So an amazing lineup of speakers. Also wanted to announce our Generational Wealth Masterclass that I put together with James Hughes. And if you have interest in that, please do email me at david.specht@cgu.edu. And one final thing, we are off and running with our certificate program for advising family enterprises. And we partner with institutions to train advisors on how to work more effectively on the human dynamics of family business. So if you're interested in that, please feel free to reach out to me. All right, on to the star of the show. I'm going to introduce Trudy Cathy White. Trudy is a native Georgian and the only daughter of Jeannette M and Truett Cathy, the founders of Chick-fil-A. She began working at the family business when she was 19 years old, probably worked there before then, but at 19 years old, she became the youngest restaurant operator at the time. As a mother to 4 and grandmother to 16, White lives to serve and love others. She recognizes that our attitudes, faith systems, and habits are tied to the values we are taught as children. Trudy's also the author of a couple of my new favorite books, and we're going to talk about both of those today. So welcome, Trudy.
Thank you. What a joy it is to be here with you all. Appreciate the invitation.
Well, today we have a special treat, and we're gonna talk about both of your books. But the first one we're going to highlight are some of the items that you talk about in A Quiet Strength. This was a book written about your mother Jeannette's influence not only on Chick-fil-A but on your family and community. Trudy, I imagine that your father Truett received a lot of attention, and maybe your mother not so much. So can you just give us a little bit of background on your mom and the role that she's played, not only in Chick-fil-A, but for you and for the community?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. Again, welcome everybody. It's a joy to be able to share with you today a little bit about our family and about our family business. Well, my mom passed away at the age of 92 in 2015. And any one of us in our family would say that we are not the family, we are not the people that we are today, nor the business we are today without our mom. My mom's probably verse that she clung to the most was from Philippians that says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. But when you think about her beginning of her life, it was very difficult, much like my dad's beginning of a young life as well. But my mother's earthly father walked away when she was a baby in arms. So she never met her natural father. But when she was 5 years old, someone introduced her to her heavenly father. And if she were here speaking with you today, she would say, never feel sorry for me that I didn't have an earthly father, because my heavenly father became my perfect earthly father. And her walk with the Lord was very evident in her life as she was growing up, because she was raised by a single mom. I admit her mother had to work full time. Her mother was a great seamstress. And she actually, if any of you are familiar with the Atlanta area, there is a theater here called the Fox Theater. It's quite popular. And my grandmother made the first curtains that hung in that theater. And I tell people that I was raised in the kitchen of my dad's restaurant, but my mother was raised backstage at the Fox Theater, which meant she got to meet a lot of actresses that were coming through Atlanta, putting on shows, and she hung around backstage and learned a lot of the music and learned to dance quite well as a young girl. Even when she was 3 years old, she got the chance to compete in the Atlanta area, not because she just enjoyed competing, but because the family needed to eat. And so she was helping being a breadwinner for her mom as she was growing up. But my mom and dad lived just down the street. They first met when they were 8 years old. They decided they wouldn't get married right then, so they waited. And my mother actually went on, graduated from college with the help of ladies at her local church that sent her off to college. And then she took courses at seminary in New Orleans. And finally, mom and dad hooked up in 1948, just 2 years after my dad had opened his first restaurant. So the first job that my mother had with my dad as a married partner was to become a waitress in his restaurant, a small little diner just about 5 minutes from the Atlanta airport. So they were married a few years, and then children came along. I have two brothers. So my oldest brother was born in 53, my other brother 54, and I was born in 55. So you can see my mother was busy having children. And once the three of us were on the scene, she decided she probably needed to be a stay-at-home mother. My dad was working very long hours. His restaurant was open 24 hours a day, so 6 days a week. So my mother decided that I think you alluded to maybe my first job when I was 19 with Chick-fil-A, but you're right, it did start a little sooner than that, because my mother felt like probably the only way she got to spend much time with my dad in those early years was to go to where he was working. So she would put all three of us in her brown station wagon, drive us about 30 minutes to Atlanta, to my dad's little restaurant, and she would have us sing for the customers. So if you Google us a little bit, you'll probably find a picture of the three of us dressed in these funny looking costumes, singing for the customer. But that was really the way the family business started, as the family being involved in the business, of course. So mom's life took on a shift as she focused more on raising us. I call her a domestic engineer. She loved to take care of things at the home. She was very organized. She liked to check out books in the library to learn how to do things. When she was 65 years old, she learned how to paint. She became a wonderful artist and did some beautiful, beautiful work. But I think the thing that our family admires the most about my mom and the life that she has lived is that early on, she decided that what my dad needed most was somebody to come alongside and support him significantly. And so she was the spiritual compass for my dad. She was a prayer warrior for our family. She was a cheerleader for us when we needed that kind of encouragement. And my dad says, the best way to know if people need encouragement is if they're breathing. And if they're breathing, then we need encouragement. So my mom was a significant encourager in my dad's life. And today, if you were to come to our office for Chick-fil-A, our headquarters is here in Atlanta, we call it our support center. And that is because we have so many staff that are supporting our operators who are out running our restaurants across the country. But I like to remind people that the home that I grew up in was the original support center, because that was the role that my mother played. You see, everything that is seen is the result of the unseen. So think about it for just a minute. You know, you look at a tree, it's beautiful, it seems strong, and but you can't see the roots, but it's the roots that are making that tree grow to be strong like it is. If you fly a kite, you don't see the wind, but it's the wind that keeps the kite up in the air, right? And so my mom was that for our family. She was not seen. She was not all that noticed, much like the foundation of your home where you live. You don't think about it, but it's really important and critical for the strength of your home, that the house that you live in. So my mother, she was a rock for our family. There's a verse in the Old Testament that says that in quietness and in trust shall be your strength. And that is where my mom found her strength, just being quiet and still, reverent, and praying occasionally for our family, and trusting that God would take care of her husband when he had those long hours, trusting us as children to the Lord's care, and also trusting that God would take care of this business as we were trying to grow it. So that's a long answer to a short question, but she played a critical role. I think sometimes we all might think, we want to be the one on the stage and in the spotlight because they're the ones that are out there, the movers and shakers of life. But in reality, I've found that oftentimes it's the people that are in the backdrop that are really the ones that are providing the support and sustaining growth and moving forward. And if you're comfortable just taking a back seat every once in a while, you can do powerful things by encouraging other people around you.
Absolutely. So most people on the call know something about Chick-fil-A, but can you give us a little bit of background and kind of the history and trajectory there, and then we'll go right back to your mom.
Yeah. So let's go back to my dad had a speech impediment when he was a little boy. He couldn't hardly pronounce his name. He grew up in a very poor family, born in Eatonton, Georgia, but moved to Atlanta because the family business, my dad's dad was a farmer and they were trying to grow cotton and the boll weevil took over. So the family moved to Atlanta and opened a boarding home. Now that's renting out rooms in the house. So Dad's mother was a cook there for all of the boarders that were there. But my dad didn't have much interest in school. He just didn't do all that well in academically. He wasn't sports inclined, but what he could do very well, when he was about 8 years old, he realized he could stop the Coke truck when it was coming down the road in his front yard. And he would take a quarter out and he would buy 6 bottles of Coke for a quarter. And then he would turn around and sell each of those bottles for a nickel, recognizing a 5-cent profit off of that quarter that he spent. And then he would gather his profit together, his nickels, and put them together to buy more Cokes and sell them. So that was from the time he was quite young. He enjoyed and thought that he had maybe a gift to be able to do that. So when he was 25 years old and single, he opened his first restaurant, partnered with his brother, one of his 2 brothers, and they opened the restaurant together in 1946, which is still in business today, in fact. So my dad was actually in the restaurant business for 18 plus years before he invented Chick-fil-A. So people forget that, you've got to put in all the hard work and hard labor before sometimes you have those aha moments. But it was the result of a fire. My dad opened a second restaurant, and that restaurant caught on fire. So it put him back in his first restaurant. He had a little time on his hands. He could be a little bit more creative. And he began to think, I wonder if I could debone the breast of the chicken. I wonder if I could put some special season coater on that chicken to keep it moist. I could pressure fry it like my mother used to fry chicken. I would pressure fry it in peanut oil. And then he would take those hamburger buns that he had right there in his restaurant, and he could take that piece of chicken, serve it on a toasted butter bun with kosher dill pickles. He always put pickles on his hamburgers. And he did that. And he says that, it was a pretty simple thing just to put a piece of chicken between a bun. And that's why he was able to do it, because he was a simple man. But that happened in 1964. And about 3 years later, Atlanta opened its very first shopping mall called Greenbrier Mall. And my dad had the idea, maybe we could sell this sandwich in a mall. The first time people had ever thought of eating a chicken sandwich. But when he went to the mall developers, they said, there is no way we're going to serve food in a mall. That just sounds way too messy. It sounds like it would make the mall smell really bad. And so my dad had a hard time convincing the mall developers that to be able to get a restaurant in the mall. But finally he told them, when people come to shop in your malls, they get hungry. And if they have to go all the way back to the parking lot and go somewhere to eat, they're not likely to come back to the mall. So he said, but if you feed them in the mall, they're liable to stay around for a little bit longer and shop a little more. So he finally convinced them. They didn't give him a very good location in the mall, but that didn't discourage him. He opened a small little restaurant there in Greenbrier, called it Chick-fil-A, because that was the name, of course, he had given to the sandwich. And I guess the rest is history.
Well, so he actually invented the food court then, not just the chicken sandwich then.
Yeah, Chick-fil-A prides itself on 3 big things. One, we introduced the very first chicken sandwich ever. We were the first to ever serve food in the mall, and we were the very first privately held organization, to close keep all of our stores closed on Sundays. So yeah.
Fantastic. So let's go back to your mother for a second here. I loved reading in your book, your brother Dan refers to your mom as the first lady of Chick-fil-A. And in your book, you quoted your dad as saying about your mom, quote, "She can do and has done anything and everything. All I ever did was put a piece of chicken between two buns." Can you talk about, so obviously he was a big fan of your mom and she was a great supporter of him, but obviously that relationship and that mutual respect was crucial. Can you talk about maybe some of the roles that your mom played and just maybe other reasons why she was just so vital to that stability, especially in a growing business in a time where your dad's time was scarce?
Yeah, a big part of the role my mother played with my dad, other than just the physical things that I've mentioned, being a waitress and there with him, but the biggest thing is that just encouraging my dad. When you're young and you're starting your own business, there are just a lot of challenges that happen just with your staff that are working there, employees that you have. Some show up, some quit, and as a young man, it was difficult. He would come home. The interesting thing about my dad, he never tried to kind of hold a lot of his challenges in. Oftentimes, he would talk about them. I know before children came along, he talked to my mom about him. But I personally, as a child growing up in that home, remember many times my dad would come home, always smelling like chicken, mind you, and he would come home and he would talk about some of the challenges that he would have at work. And my mother was always quick to say, well, let's just take this to the Lord. I mean, prayer was a big part of our family growing up, and we recognized that God is faithful through the years, but we learned quickly that we needed to take our problems to the Lord through our mom. That was a big role that she played with my dad. And she would try to travel with my dad when restaurants began to open. She would go with him to grand openings, be right there to help. She didn't really contribute that much to the recipes that we have in our back in the days when we used to serve coleslaw and carrot basin. Maybe some of you remember chicken salad was on our menu. Some of you are old enough to remember some of those if you've been around Chick-fil-A enough through the years. But she would help in the kitchen. She would prepare a lot of these dishes in the restaurant with them. But they complemented each other. Now my dad got energized by being out with people. My mother got energized by being home and being quiet. But she would go with him to support him, and she tried really hard to make sure our home, when he would come home, was a place of peace that he could come home to and relax, knowing that he might dump a lot of the problems that were going on to her, and she would say, let's pray about it. Let's read some scripture. Let's get encouraged, and let's just, have a positive outlook on life. Both my mom and dad seemed to be extremely positive about life, but I think that came from an inner peace in their walk with the Lord. I believe that's what they would say even today, that caused them to always have a positive outlook on life.
Fantastic. So you talked a little bit about, purpose, and from a very, very early on in the business, it seemed like the mission and the values were established and adhered to. The Chick-fil-A corporate purpose reads, quote, "To glorify God by being a faithful steward to all that is entrusted to us and to have a positive influence on all who come in contact with Chick-fil-A." Can you talk a little bit about how important it's been to be that clear on your mission, especially as there's been pressure throughout the years from maybe a more secular society, and maybe speak specifically to the restaurant being not open on Sunday, if you would, please.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think for all of us, it's important when we talk about this word purpose. We're always asking this question at some point in life. I'm sure we all have asked, why am I here? What is my purpose? It's something that young people are asking. There are three major questions young people are asking: who am I? Do I belong? And why am I here? What's my purpose? So when we get clarity of our purpose, we get clarity of our priorities. And that's what it did for us at Chick-fil-A. Now, the business started in 1967, opened our first Chick-fil-A, but it wasn't until the 1980s that we actually pinned a purpose. And it came out of a difficult time. If any of you remember much about in the 1980s, economic was in a recession. A lot of our competitors were offering a chicken sandwich, which was driving the chicken prices up. Interest on borrowed money was in double digits. It was a difficult time to be in business. We had somewhat overextended ourselves by opening about 100 restaurants within 24-month period, one of the biggest leaps we'd ever made in our growth with our restaurant at that time. And we begin to look around and say, are we going to be able to ride this wave out? And the question that we all ask when difficulty hits oftentimes is, why am I here? Why are we really doing this? Why are we really in business? So my dad pulled away our key leadership, and they began to have those discussions. Why are we really here? And through those discussions, we discovered we're really not here to see how much money we can make, although you've got to make money to be in business. And we're really not here to see if we can be the fastest growing quick service restaurant. But what we realized that we were here for is that we were here, as you just quoted, to glorify God by being a faithful steward of all that He entrusts to us and to have a positive influence on all who come in contact with Chick-fil-A. So when our leadership team walked away with that purpose statement, it became the filter for everything we did from that point forward, asking ourselves, are we honoring God by the way we're stewarding what He's given us? When we open a Chick-fil-A store, every restaurant that we open, we always have a dedication dinner. You may not be aware of that, but we invite our team members that we've hired and family members to come and be a part of this dedication dinner. We have a wonderful dinner for them together. And then we just share with our team members and remind them that we actually view this business as coming from God. He is the one that has provided it for us. And all the customers that come in our stores are just a gift from the Lord for us to be able to serve them. And so we remind our team members that it is their responsibility to make sure that they're honoring the Lord by stewarding well what they've been given. We open a new store, it's got all new equipment in it. They're going to make money there. They're going to build friendships there. And all these things, we realize we need to steward them really well. Even their time, we tell them, we want you to be busy in the store. We want you to be serving. We want you to be attentive. We want you to be aware of what's going on, so that you're serving the very best you can. So all those things helped us once we had our purpose to be able to talk about stewarding our resources well, and also having a positive influence on everybody. So it has made a difference in every component of our life, for sure, as we've gone through. And you mentioned being closed on Sunday. My dad, when he first opened his restaurant back in 1946, decided to make it a 24-hour restaurant because of the location. It was only 5 minutes from the Atlanta airport. It was very close to a Ford plant where they were running shifts round the clock. And so you could walk in my dad's restaurant at 3 o'clock in the morning and it would be buzzing with people, because it's just the environment where he opened the restaurant, that he had customers round the clock. But at the end of those 6 days of having worked such long hours, my dad and his brother, who was in partnership with, they said that, I don't think that we can physically stay open another day. We've just got to take a day off on Sunday. And they realized, well, even the Bible says that God took a day and rested on Sunday. So being closed on Sunday started not so much from a spiritual decision, but physically and mentally, they were just so tired. So decided to close the business on Sunday and to keep it closed on Sunday. And we've never opened any of our restaurants. My dad has often said the very best business decision he ever made was to keep his restaurant closed on Sunday. And what I have taken from that in my own life is recognizing that sometimes the things that we decide not to do can be more powerful than the things we decide to do. Because a lot of people will drive down the interstate. You've maybe done it yourself and think, I'd love to have a Chick-fil-A. And then you realize, today's Sunday, I can't stop and get one. That's even happened to me sometimes. We tell people just eat twice as much on Monday. But we recognize that being closed on Sunday can be a testimony really to who we are, but mostly to our God, who says we all need to take a break every once in a while. We can't work 24/7, most definitely. So that's a little bit about why the purpose statement has been so meaningful for us, and how much it has helped us stay the course and not get off mission and drift. And there are temptations all around, of course. We all understand that in business. But once you kind of drive a stake in the ground, this is who we are, and this is why we're in business, and that becomes our focus, we really begin to separate ourselves from our competitors once that purpose was integrated into what we're doing, because we approach our work in a very different way when we say, the reason I'm here is to glorify God by stewarding well what He's given us and having a positive influence. And that motivates a lot of people.
I love it. And I'm sure your dad did not intend this, but I'll just share personally, because you're not open on Sunday, it's one more opportunity for me to talk to my kids about why that day is important. So, yes, I'm glad that he took that day off to just be able to collapse and rest. And but maybe one of the unintended consequences are the conversations that are happening around the country because your store is not on Sunday, is not open on Sunday. So I guess I just thank you for living out your purpose.
Yeah.
I want to shift now to I want to take some time for your newest book, A Legacy That Lasts. And you begin that book with kind of an interesting puzzle around identity. And all of us on the call, well, it's a mix of advisors and business owning families on this call, and those that serve those families. And as you think about identity, following the footsteps of a founder can be overwhelming and disorienting. And in your book, you talk about identity and how it does not have to be a crisis. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Again, I think this is something we all ask ourselves, and particularly, I would say, this next generation are wrestling with this idea of who am I? It is certainly identity, but it doesn't have to be a crisis. For about 13 years, I was the director for a camp that my mom and dad started called Windshake Camps. I was the director for the girls' camp. And I remember on opening day in the summertime when parents would come to drop off their campers to stay at an overnight camp for 2 weeks. And I would be right out there in the middle of all of it, just meeting the parents and speaking to the campers. And parents would bring their little girls over to me and say, "This is Miss Trudy. She's going to be your camp director while you're here for the summer." And then almost without fail, they would say, "But do you know who she really is?" And I would just wait for the answer. And then they would look at their children and they would say, "She's the daughter of the man who invented Chick-fil-A." And then, we'd have a little conversation and they would walk on. And always in my mind, I would hear that comment that people would say, "Do you know who she really is?" And I have recognized that so many times we connect our identity with who we're related to, or what we do, or what job we have, that becomes how we define our identity. But it is not at all what the Bible, what gives us truth about how it defines who we are. The Bible says that we're fearfully and wonderfully made, right? That God knew us before we were born, while we were yet in our mother's womb. He knew us, and that when we were created, He gave us a life and an opportunity to know Him. And that is really where my identity comes from. I think about, I am who my Heavenly Father says that I am. Now, we don't really add value to our name. What gives our name value is who we become in life. And we have tried to drive this message home with our children as well as with our grandchildren. Quickly, I will tell you that our oldest granddaughter is a senior in high school, getting ready to graduate next month. And she had homeschooled through the 8th grade, but in 9th grade, she decided she would like to go to a real school in the real world. And she went to high school there, and she was elected to be on the homecoming court, voted as the representative for the 9th grade. And we all went to the ball game because she was going to be presented during the halftime show at the football game. And when she came off from the field, we were family around there just talking with her and congratulating her. The next day in school, the teacher called Ashlyn over and spoke with her and said, "Ashlyn, I wanted to congratulate you, but I also wanted to ask you because I saw our local Chick-fil-A operator. He was hugging you and congratulating you last night. And how do you even know our local Chick-fil-A operator?" And she said, "Well, actually, he's my uncle. It's my uncle Ross Cathy, who is my oldest brother's son." And the teacher said, "Wait a minute, he's your uncle?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, "My Truett Cathy is my great grandfather." And the teacher was just shocked. And she said, "Ashlyn, you've been in class all this time and nobody knew that about you, that you were even part of the Chick-fil-A family or the Cathy family." And she said, "Well," and the teacher asked, "Why haven't you told us?" And she said, "Well, I didn't think it was all that important." So I say that story to say how wonderful it is that already as a young 18-year-old girl, she is realizing that is not what defines that doesn't define who she is. So our identity is it doesn't have to be a crisis. We can believe the truth of what God says about who we are, and we can accept that. And we focus more on who we're becoming, and not so much about who we are, who we're connected with, for sure.
So I want to go back in time a little bit, and I'd like to get your experience with being 19 years old and leading, and operating a Chick-fil-A. What was that like, being 19? I'm sure you were leading people that were probably older than you. Can you take us back for a moment and just share what that was like?
Sure. Well, we've all been 19, and when you're 19, you think you can do everything, right? So to me, it wasn't going to be a problem. I was ready to kind of take on the world. But honestly, I just finished my freshman year in college. I had come home for the summer to visit with my mom and dad. My dad at that time was heavily involved in selecting all of our operators for our restaurants. And so he was getting ready to open, there was a new mall that was coming in Birmingham, and he was on the hunt for an operator. He had asked me if I had knew of anybody in the Birmingham area that might make a good operator for him. And I told him, Dad, I haven't met anybody, but if you need somebody, I will volunteer gladly. You know, it's just there to help my dad out. And he was kind of shocked. He said, would you want to be a Chick-fil-A operator? I said, well, sure, I would love to do that. So honestly, it wasn't much more than a 10-minute conversation, if you could believe it. My dad said there would be 3 guidelines. One is I would have to go through training, just like all of our other operators do. The second was that I couldn't call him crying if I had problems. I would just have to go directly to my supervisor with issues and problems that I had. And the third was that I would have to turn the store back in after a year, that he wanted me to finish my education. He was afraid if I stayed in the restaurant business very long, I might not go back and finish. So he said, at the end of 1 year, I want you to turn the restaurant back into the company and go back and finish school. Now, one thing I wasn't perceptive about, that I will advise every one of you who are listening, is never do anything just one time. That's the hardest thing, is to do something when you've got to do it another time to really actually reap the benefits and to actually learn. So I took the hardest year, and that was the year to open that restaurant. But yeah, so I opened it up with a real sense of confidence that I could do this. But honestly, I didn't realize until really we began to open the doors how challenging it was to run a restaurant. It meant I had to hire my team members, interview them. But I do share the story, which is a totally true story, that one day one of the college students walked in to apply for a job with me, and it was a pencil and paper back in that day. He was filling out his application. And as I was watching him fill it out, I thought to myself, I need to hire this guy. He would be really good to have in the store. Now, not because I knew anything about him. I had never met him. I had no idea what his name was, but he was good looking. And I thought that was a good reason for me to hire a guy to work in the restaurant with me. So I hired John White. He came and worked with me in the store. And the more he was in the store, the more I began to kind of think, I'm really interested in this fella. But I knew I was wearing kind of a funny looking uniform. I smelled like chicken. There wasn't a whole lot I could do to really impress him. I was working from opening to close 6 days a week. But that I woke up one day and I realized I was his boss. I was making out his schedule, and he didn't have to be free on Friday nights to go out with any girls or meet anybody else. And that strategy works. So we've been married now for 45 and a half years. So I'm thankful to Chick-fil-A for meeting and finding my lifelong partner. But honestly, at the core of this story is something that my dad did that is hard for a lot of people to believe, that he entrusted a 19-year-old with a restaurant. But that really depicts to me the kind of man that my dad was. He loved investing in young people. He often recognized potential in other people's lives before they actually recognized it. So anything he could do to propel them forward, to be able to become more the person he saw that they could become, that's what he did. So that was how my career. That was an official job. I actually did get paid to do that with Chick-fil-A as an operator. But I'm grateful for parents who gave me an opportunity to do that. I did turn the restaurant back into the company. I did graduate from college, and then life moved on from there. But I'm thankful for that opportunity, mainly to find John, for sure.
We all need a Truett Cathy in our lives to believe in us and nudge us forward. So let's move forward. After operating Chick-fil-A at Century Plaza for a year. You met your husband, you returned to college, and then later got married. My oldest daughter, McKaylee, is actually getting married this Saturday, Trudy. And we're really excited for her. And if you could give any insight or advice to a younger Trudy Cathy White on the day you were getting married, what would you share?
Oh my goodness. Great question, and congratulations. That's super exciting. Let me go back and tell you that when I was 13 years old, I was walking on the beach with my dad, and my dad asked me, what kind of man do I want to marry? And I hadn't given a whole lot of thought as a 13-year-old. And I said, Dad, I'm not sure. And he said, well, Trudy, it's never too late to start thinking about the characteristics of the man you want to spend the rest of your life with. And that motivated me to get a piece of paper, put it in my Bible, and I began to write down a list of just things that I thought, I would enjoy in a spouse that I would marry, that would be important for me from spiritually. What would I want, and what would I want in terms of meeting not just my needs, but how I might can meet his needs. What was like, there was quite a massive list that I had by the time I went to college. And my mom and dad taught young people, 12 and 13-year-olds, in Bible study at their local church. My dad taught for over 50 years, my mom for about 30 years. And they often told young people that, I know sometimes it's hard to be a teenager and your parents are always telling you what to do. They tell you when you have to be home, they tell you what you have to eat. Sometimes they tell you what time you go to bed. And they said, I know you get tired of that, but what my mom and dad impressed upon us as children and these young people they work with said the three most important decisions in life you're going to get to make, and they all begin with the letter M. The first is you get to choose who your master will be for life, and you want to get that right. The second is you get to choose what your mission will be for life. What will be your career? Who will you become in life? So your mission. So you've got your master, your mission, and the third M would be you get to choose who your mate is going to be for life. And your parents aren't going to have a lot of say-so in that. You can involve them in that decision, but ultimately you get to make that decision. So from time we were quite young, we realized that this was going to be an important decision. So I'm sure that your daughter, Michaela, has had some upbringing and understand this is an important decision she's made. This will be a big step for her. But I think my best advice to her would be that if she's a follower of Jesus Christ, that she continues to grow in that relationship, and hopefully her husband might continue to grow. And I think that has really been the secret for John and I to help us to be able to have a strong marriage. But I think the word that I would give her is the word that begins with a C. It's not Chick-fil-A, but it's commitment. That she realizes that she is making a significant commitment, and that she would follow through with this commitment, even in the ups and downs. There are no perfect people, so there's no perfect marriage. Yeah. My parents had struggles. John and I have had struggles in our own marriage, but we have been very committed to our marriage. The first time we had a really bad argument, I threatened John that I was going to go back home. And after I did that, we both kind of sat down and said, oh my goodness, we can't start talking like this already. We've just got married. Yeah. And then that's when we kind of had this heart-to-heart talk. And we said, we will never talk like that again. We will be so committed that we're going to work through our difficulties. And oftentimes you can't do it alone. You have to bring people around you that can give you some wisdom and godly counsel. And Michaela needs to know this. Hopefully you can tell her before next week, but she's not marrying one person, she's marrying a family. So I hope she likes his side of the family because that's a big part of the marriage piece, is that you embrace the family and the culture that they bring into the family as well. But I'm sure she's going to do great, and I send my very best wishes to her.
Thank you, Trudy. So I want to just pause for a second, and I would say to those that are here, if you have questions for Trudy, we're going to try to spend the last 10 or 15 minutes with your questions. So if you'll submit those in the chat, I have a couple of other questions before we get there, but if you could send those in, that would be great. So you talk about marrying the family, and as you and your husband got married, you ended up deciding to go and spend time in Brazil, and I believe it was 10 years. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct. Mm-hmm. That's correct.
And you already had children when you went to Brazil?
That's correct.
One of the things that I like to talk about is raising experience-rich kids. I don't necessarily care if my kids are monetarily wealthy or not, but I want them to be experience rich. And in your book, you talk about creating personalized value experiences, whether it's with your kids or with your grandkids. Can you talk about some of those and maybe give some examples? I know the listeners love to have some tangible ideas or takeaways on that. What would you say there?
Yeah, most definitely. We tend to think that we give gifts, we give things. Those are the things that children will remember. But oftentimes those things break. We outgrow them. We lose them. They don't have value to us anymore. So I have coined this word in my book of value experiences, because I think experiences are the things that stay with us in our mind. They become the memories that we look back on. My dad, when I was a senior in high school, he asked me, Trudy, what is the thing that you will remember the most about that I have done for you as a dad? And I think my answer that I gave him surprised him. I told him, said, the thing I'm going to remember, Dad, that you did for me was some of those nights when you would come home very late at night, I would still be awake in my bed, and you would sit down and you would lean over to me and you would say, Trudy, do you want to talk to me about your day? And so what my dad was doing was giving me the gift of time. He just spent time with me, and he would just let me talk, and he would listen. So when we create experiences where we can be around others and we can give the gift of time, it's the most valuable thing that you can do for them. Now, in my book, I have listed some very practical things that John and I've put in place, particularly now that we're in the season is with grandparents. We decided we would love to have time with all of our grandchildren together without their parents around. So we created something called Camp Meepaw. I'm Mimi, John is Papa, and so we call it Camp Meepaw. And we bring all our grandchildren together for 3 days and 2 nights. It's kind of crazy because there are a lot of them. They range from 18 down to 5-year-old. Now we have a newborn that just was born in January, so a little baby, not coming to camp this summer just yet. But we just do a lot of fun things together with them. We eat all our meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner in our home together with them. They help us prepare them. We do crafts together. We have a pool at our house, so they enjoy swimming. We have a pond out front, so we'll take them down fishing. Everybody gets on a fishing rod, and we all fish for several hours together. We weigh their fish. We make a big deal who gets the longest, who gets the first, who gets the heaviest fish. And it's just a big time together. And we have devotional time together. We just share truths from God's word with them, and they absolutely love it. It's so much fun. I actually send an email out to all the parents and tell them it's time to register for camp, and tell them register quick because it'll fill up in a hurry, and then once all the children have signed on and registered for camp, I send out a message to the parents, camp is closed, we're full now, nobody else can register, and we just run it kind of like a camp. Of course, my background was a little bit in camping, so we run it that way. But here's what I know about raising children is things that they learn are more caught than taught. I'm sure you've probably heard that phrase. So if things are more learned when they're just caught, it just means John and I want to spend a lot of time around our children so that they can catch on to things that we value in our own life. We also, because we have so many grandchildren, we can't be with all of them on their birthdays every time, but we promised each one of our grandchildren as much as we possibly could that we would spend a weekend with just them when they turn 8 years old. We would take them somewhere or do something with them for the weekend. And then we would do it every 3 years from then on. So when they turn 8, when they turn 11, when they turn 14, and when they turn 17, they know they have a promised weekend with just Mimi and Papa. And they love to get away from their siblings and their parents. And we love it. You never quite know what grandchildren are going to say when their parents aren't around. I think the parents are more nervous about letting us be around their children because of that. But we have a great time together. And another thing we have just recently started about 5 years ago, I guess, John and I have given up our Labor Day weekends. We don't use them for ourselves anymore. We've decided to use those for our teenage grandchildren. So any of the grandchildren who are 13 and above get an invite from us to come and hang out with us for Labor Day weekend. But they have discovered, and they know ahead of time, that it's a very intense kind of weekend. We do mix a little fun in, but we do some we go pretty deep in our conversations with them. We let them take some assessments to understand a little bit about their personality, kind of discover their strengths. We actually do an exercise called value exercise that I talk about in my book to help them begin to think about what are their values and what's important to them in life. Now, when you're 13, that's going to change a little bit by the time you're 13 until you're about 18, I'm sure. But at some point, your values begin to solidify. But we want them to start early, start thinking about, you actually have a choice to decide what matters to you and where you invest your energy into things. So those are some practical things or other things in my book, but it has really, value experiences will stay with the next generation for a long time. Anytime we give the gift of time to be with others, we're creating an experience that probably will last a lifetime.
Well, what a wonderful example you've provided. And when I think about, working with families, oftentimes they allocate great resources and time to the management of their financial assets. And when I ask a question like, what financial assets and what time assets are you going to invest in your kids or your grandkids this year, it's often there's not an allocation there. It's not a spoken allocation, and many are doing their best to here and there try to influence your kids. But as you talk about being so intentional about creating these moments, the moments are flying by all the time, and the time is going. But I'm just so grateful that you've put this into your books and given some great ideas. I think if grandparents all over the world would emulate what you're doing, our kids would be a lot more grounded. And there's something special that happens between a child and a grandparent. There's a safety there that they can have conversations that maybe they can't have with their parents. And for you to be able to be there to solidify those values and help them, just by asking them good questions and letting them think and letting them articulate and kind of discover their values with you. What an amazing gift. What an amazing gift. So thanks for providing that example.
Sure.
So I have one question in the chat, and Keenan, if you want to take yourself off mute and ask the question yourself, that would be fantastic. And let Trudy know where you're calling from.
Okay. Hi, Trudy. Professor at California Baptist University, excuse me, Riverside, California. We started a family business center there recently and had the privilege of Dan coming and speaking a couple of times at our university. And Andrew actually came to my class a couple of times. So
Wonderful.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I was under the impression that you ran the foundation for the family. And Dan and Bubba ran the company. Am I wrong on that?
You're somewhat close. Yes, Bubba and Dan have always been involved in the management side of the business. After John and I, we did international work for about 20 years. So when we came back, we began to kind of focus a little bit more on the philanthropic arm of the business. So that's where you're picking that up from. And then a part of that meant I did help out with our camping program, which is a part of the WindShape Foundation, which that my mom and dad started. So yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Of course. Sure.
Thank you. All right. We have a couple of other questions in here. Monet, is it Monet or I'm sorry, I probably mispronounced it.
Yes, sir.
Do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes, sir. Miss Cathy, I just want to ask, what was your hardest chapter in this book where you had to really let go and just jot it down?
That's a great question. I was inspired to write this book after my mom and dad had both passed away. My dad lived to be 93, passed away in 2014. My mom, as I mentioned, lived to be 92, passed away in 2015. But when they passed away, because I'm the only daughter, the youngest in the family, I had the responsibility to go through their house, which they lived in for 56 of their 66 years of marriage. So 56 years in one house is a long time. When they passed away, they didn't take anything with them, just as a reminder. So they left everything. And I had the responsibility to clean through all of that. And when I did, I realized that, they left a lot of things, but the thing of most value that they left was their legacy. And I realized when I began to write this book, the hardest part was trying to realize that the legacy that we leave then is the life we're living right now. And to try to figure out, okay, how do we put this down in words to help people understand that we often talk about leaving a legacy, and somehow it gives us this impression that at some point in life I'll start leaving my legacy. But no, that's not true. Actually, today you are living the legacy that you will leave, and just trying to impart in people the importance of understanding that concept so that we can be just a little more intentional about how we live our life. Now, my mother used to say, days are long, but life is short. And it's so true, right? We've all had long days, but life in general is very short. Paul in the book of Ephesians says, this is kind of the way he says it. He says, so be careful how you live. Don't live as those who are fools, but live like those who are wise. And then he says, make the most of every opportunity. So the challenging part to me in this book was just trying to how do I engage the reader to a degree that will propel them to action, to make some adjustments in what we've all been given. We've all been given time, talent, resources, and influence. And we just need to have a pause, I guess, and check in our system, in ourselves. Are we taking advantage of those things that we've been given? Are we making the most of every opportunity?
Thank you for that question. I love that answer. We have another couple of questions in here. Lisa, would you like to get on and ask your question?
Hey, hi, Kathy. Thanks for sharing. This is so wonderful. And your family's just so blessed to have such a strong moral and spiritual compass, because I think that from everything that you shared, that is the foundation of your family, and it's probably its success, right? I was really impressed by the story you told about your granddaughter who was inducted into the homecoming court. And the fact that no one knew that she was part of the Cathy family or the Chick-fil-A family. Well, I'm curious if you have tips, like what are your top 3 tips about raising kids who are that well individuated, that they're able to separate themselves from their family's wealth?
Well, one, I would say a lot of prayer. My mother was a lady of prayer, so I would say you can never pray too much for our children when we're raising them. The wisdom comes from the Lord, and we need a lot of wisdom and discernment when we're raising children. We've raised 4. We've had our seasons of challenge with them as well. I won't go into that side of the story, but certainly you can read about it in some of my books. They've been challenged. So prayer would be the first one. Second, I would say, is to help them understand that we don't own what we have. God has given us everything that we have. The air that we breathe has come from the Lord. My parents started us very young about that, helping us to understand to be respectful for what we have. Even a home that we have to live in, God has provided that for us. And so we were raised understanding with a respect for what God has given us. And so any blessings or any things that we were able to enjoy, we realized we were blessed to be a blessing. And our parents often shared whatever they had in terms of any resources, whether that's financial or just material things that we had, always shared those with other people. We always made ourselves available to others, to the point that this may surprise you, but my parents, when we were probably 11 or 12 years old, began to tell us that if we would wait till we were 18, they would help us get a car. And so when you're 11 and 12, that sounds wonderful. But then when we got to be about 14, 15, 16, and some of our friends were all, getting cars, and we were kind of thinking, we got to wait till we're 18. But my parents reminded us, but you said, you would help us if we'll wait till we're 18. Well, when my parents did that, Dan got his first car when he turned 18, my brother Bubba when he turned 18. And when I got my car, I'm a December baby. And when my parents gave me my car, it was a Ford Mustang. It was white out on the outside and red on the interior, if you can believe it. And my mom and dad put a little plaque in the car that was on the dashboard, and it had life verse, which is Luke 1:37, that says, "For with God all things are possible." And my parents had just a short little time with me around that car. And my dad said, I know, Trudy, you think this is coming from your earthly parents, but I want you to know this is coming from your heavenly Father. He's just channeled it through us. He's allowed us to be able to have the resources to be able to get you this car so you can drive it around. But because it came from him, you need to understand you have to steward it well, and it belongs to him. So you just need to manage it and take good care of it. Well, that made all the difference in the world how I approached my time in that car. Even when I would turn the radio on and I would turn to a station, and I would get some music on that I really like. And then I would think, I don't know if I should be listening to some of this music. This is God's car. I don't think he likes this kind of music. And I would change it. Or even if friends from school would jump in the car with me, and I went to school, a very a private, well-to-do students, and they would jump in the car with me, and some of their lifestyles were different from how I was raised, and even some of their language was different from the language that I would use. And I would have to tell them, I said, hey guys, can't talk like that in this car. You can do it outside my car, but not inside this car. I was so aware that this really wasn't mine. And so it's wonderful if you can raise children to have a respect, I think, for what they have, and realize that it's not about me, it's about him, it's about God. So those have been important to us in life.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lisa. I think we have time for one more question. Greg's question is a little kind of more operational, but let's go for it. Greg, do you want to ask your question?
Thank you. Chick-fil-A has both company-owned and franchise stores, like all the chains do, really. And I'm wondering, what are the criteria that go into the awarding of a franchise? And do you think there are things that you look for that other chains don't?
Well, thank you for that question. We have, yes, all of our restaurants are operator owned. And to be able to be an operator in Chick-fil-A, you've got to go through quite a process. It takes quite a few years to be able to get on as a Chick-fil-A operator, but they don't have to put up a whole lot of money. This is what separates us from your other quick service restaurants. So we're not looking for a financial investment from someone. We're looking for a physical investment in that person. They would emotionally connect with this business, and to make a difference in the lives of their team members that they hire. That's probably the number one separator from the other businesses, is our operator contract that we have with our operators is quite unique. My dad started from the very beginning when he opened up in 1967. So whereas most franchises, you think of a monetary investment that has to go into the business, we want these operators to, they own their business, they're in business for themselves, but not by themselves. So Chick-fil-A comes alongside of them. We stock the restaurants for them. They run it. We helping them with all their marketing. It's a partnership, no doubt. But our number one concern when these operators step in our restaurants is that we want them to be investing in the lives of those that are around them, to teach them our serve model, which talks a lot about how we're to go to the second mile when we serve others. We involve them in all their training. We help them understand, number one, we start with our purpose, why we're there in business, and then we help them understand that they're to make an impact in their community where they are. So it's very unique, and it's the reason we have operators to stay with us quite a while, because they are committed to that commitment of their restaurant and to develop those around them.
Impressive. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Greg. And Trudy, with that, our time has flown. I am so grateful for you taking this time to share. And I'm really grateful for all the work that goes into this. I've written a couple of books, and it is not easy. And you poured your heart and soul into it, and really been vulnerable and shared some of the things that are close to your heart. And so we really appreciate the time that you've invested in us today. And I would encourage all those on the call to go grab that book, A Legacy That Lasts, and take some of those learnings that are very practical, and consider putting your own spin on it, making it your own, but making those bigger investments of time into your kids and your grandkids. Trudy, any final comments before we say goodbye?
No, what a joy to be with you all today. Thank you, Dave, for the invitation. I'm certainly honored My dad writes in his first book that one of his values was that he felt like he could honor God best by being successful in business. And so I think he has been able to do that in a way that's very honoring to the Lord. And I would just put a challenge out there to all of us. May we too choose to live our life in such a way that we're intentional so that our legacy lasts.
Thank you so much, Trudy.
My
And with
pleasure.
that, we'll sign off from Officer
Okay,
Drucker.
thank you
Have
so
a great
much.
day, everyone.
Uh-huh.